All right, we're back. If everybody could, please give another thank you to Blair Levin for his comments. And coming all this way to join us here, we really appreciate that. Our next segment of our program today, we're going to be focused on a question. Would a next generation high-speed network benefit Bloomington, and how? And we're joined by an esteemed panel of experts in various aspects of either the operation of these networks or the impacts on them, or how our local economy or their own businesses would be impacted by that. So joining us on this panel today, Brad Wheeler, Vice President for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer of Indiana University. Lynn Coyne, President of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. Elise Cohn, Principal Analyst of CTC Technology and Energy. And Mike Trotzke, co-founder and managing member of SproutBox. And I believe some of our panelists may have an opening statement or a short presentation, but I'd like to go ahead and start off with Brad Wheeler. If you have something that you want to say, some initial remarks, by all means, go ahead. Thank you.
Certainly, I'll begin. And first, I know Blair had to catch a plane, but it really was great to have him here. He really has been a champion of broadband for a long time, and I thank Mayor and Rick for bringing him in for this. If he had stayed just one moment longer, I would have reminded him that the University of Indiana is actually in Pennsylvania. But Indiana University is happily a resident of Bloomington and other communities in our state. I'll begin by saying, of course, greater broadband in the city would be helpful. So beyond the obvious answer, why and what would that actually mean? Some of you know I'm double hatting right now also as the interim dean for the School of Informatics and Computing. And if Heidi Kesner were here with the Kelly School or Larry Singel with the college, we would all tell you that one of the greatest battles we have every year is attracting and retaining top talent at Indiana University. I am in the midst right now in my dean capacity, as is practically every other dean, of fending off sticky fingers from deans and other universities who would like to entice some of our folks to move away. And it's not just the sunshine and mountains that keep them here. So we really have to have more of an offer than just, hey, we're a great, cool, big state university. You know what, there's a lot of big, cool, great state universities across the nation. The city of Bloomington itself is one of our strongest selling points. This community is fantastic. You know it. You choose to live and make your life here. So we do sell this community very much. But a second point is to the extent of how people live and work today. So for the folks that we're trying to attract here, we have candidates in this week as we spin up the new program in Intelligent Systems Engineering, first engineering program here on the Bloomington campus. As we attract people here, we are up against places that are continuing to make the kinds of investments that Blair talked about. We recruit against UT Austin every year. We work for retention against UT Austin every year. You know they are making a move with what they're doing. To give a second part about how people live and work today, the whole nature of all these buildings that we've got here on the Bloomington campus and otherwise, we think a lot about how the nature of work is today. The phrase today, when someone says it, that I can't come to the office, I have too much to get done today, that they need to sit at home and focus because they're working on a project, a grant, they're trying to get all their grading done, they're trying to get something done, and it's the same for you too. Well, the more that we enable a fluidity between work environments, somebody working at home, somebody working in their office. How many people pick up and go to Starbucks sometimes? Just maybe a little bit of the ambiance, but there's Wi-Fi there and they can get the things done that they need. So the notion of where people work and how they get things done, this multiplicative factor that Blair talks about, I think is immensely important. So I'll end with two more points, then pass to my good colleagues. We have just under 9,000 faculty and staff at Indiana University, Bloomington, who live in this community and thereabouts. So it is immensely important to us, this question of getting broadband and gig to our homes and to our businesses. And then the second one, with another hat on, with the Indiana University Research and Technology Corporation. We've worked with BEDC, Lynn and his predecessor, with Mike, other members of the community. We've had a couple of near misses. We came close of recruiting some very significant tech investments into this community with firms that were out shopping for where to put several hundred employees at a time in tech work. Thus far, we've been a bridesmaid, not a bride in that competition. This would be one of those points early on that helps to be a differentiator. In not too long, it would eliminate us from even reasonable consideration for those firms.
Lynn?
Thank you. First, let me say thank you to Mayor Hamilton and Rick for having the foresight and the great guests and cast of characters you've gathered here today. Congratulations for that. The second thing, before I get into the economic development, is let me just say that Bloomington has the capacity to be great. There is no question about it. We have the resources. Look at what we have at Indiana University, the city government, the commitment of the community. We have the capacity to be extraordinary. It is simply exercising the will to be extraordinary, organizing it, collaborating, communicating, and doing what we need to do to make it happen. So I thank everyone for coming today, and we want to keep that going because it is certainly possible, whether it's in broadband or healthcare or whatever it may be. I agree absolutely with what Brad has said, and what we experience and what he says the university needs, we hear from employers all the time. We are competing for talent. We are competing for the opportunities that a community like this offers, and it is a highly competitive environment. We tend to think of ourselves as wonderful and we just live in some form of blissful ignorance here. It's not that way. There are many communities who would claim the very same thing that we claim. And so that's really how we have to compete. And high-speed access, high-speed broadband is a critical factor in recruiting and retaining. Most jobs in America now are not created by the large, giant companies. They are created by companies who have been in business less than 5 years, who are entrepreneurial. They create the jobs. We have companies right here in Bloomington who are extraordinary examples of that. We have to give them the tools they need to be able to function, to grow, and create the employment in our community. To do that, they have to transmit data at very high speeds. They have to transmit and deliver a data product and receive a data product. You've heard it mentioned a couple of times. We are going to build in this community a regional academic healthcare center. It is going to be on the Indiana University campus. It is going to be a collaborative effort with the university, with possibilities that are frankly sometimes unimaginable in terms of the future of healthcare, the future of healthcare informatics and information technology. It's going to be situated in the heart of that. How you receive your healthcare in the future may well be determined by things that occur there in the years ahead.
Can I just
Yes.
put an exclamation point on this? That rolls off the tongue, a regional academic health center. But let me just drive home the point of how distinctive that is. An academic health center generally is found in a large city where you have a cluster of large hospitals and a large medical school and it's very much density population based. To create a regional academic health center with the hospital and ultimately the programs in nursing and the med sciences programs and those things all clustered together just in adjacent buildings, this is very, very unique in the nation, and it's the partnerships all around that's making that possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad. And as you think about a hospital sitting next to a healthcare education facility by the university, right next door to that is Brad Wheeler's operation in information technology. And then we have the data center. We have a nucleus of what could be the future. The question is how to imagine it and then how to deliver it. And high-speed broadband access is going to be fundamentally critical to that. I wrote a column recently about delivery of health care, and we all know we'll be wearing some device that's going to tell somebody everything they need to know about what our bodies are doing sometime in the future. How does that get places? How does that get analyzed? How does that mean anything to anybody? Broadband is going to be essential to that. Regionalism. We are a regional hub. There's no question about that. And we owe that almost to our regional partners to participate and cooperate with them and provide opportunities for them. This may reach well beyond the borders of the city or the county in times ahead. Business attraction, it's critical. It is no longer just maybe we have it, it is we have to have it. 17 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was finding properties for the university, the first thing I would ask is, where's your connectivity? Where's your broadband? Where's your internet connectivity? Because we saw it as the same thing as water and electricity and sewer. It's an essential utility. We wouldn't even think of going in a building without it. Brad and his colleagues at the university had the foresight to build what was then called, I presume still called, the iLight network to connect the universities with dark fiber. It has meant great things for all of those universities. It can mean the same thing for our community and our enterprises that live here and our daily lives. I could go into a lot more about education, but I'll leave that for the rest of the panelists. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Lynn. Elise, I think Brad did the job of correcting Blair, so you didn't have to.
I was getting ready to.
I knew that you would have if he didn't.
Well, and the reason I would have, as Rick knows, which has not come up and I didn't see in the bio, is that I am actually a proud alum of IU. I have come back many times over the last couple of years and am constantly amazed at how Bloomington has changed since I was here. A lot of those changes, whether it's the expansion of the farmers market or the expansion of Oliver Winery, are great. Some, I'm looking at you, Von Lee, I feel more mixed about. But I think as the mayor has kind of set the vision out there, it's important that Bloomington continue to change to stay the thriving community that it is and that we all know and love. And high-speed networks are a critical part of that. I think Brad and Lynn have done a lot to touch on one of the key benefits, which is attracting and retaining students, faculty, staff, businesses, residents. So I'm going to touch on a couple of others, though that is my number one, and I'll come back to it in a second. The other is also kind of alluded to, but Bloomington has the potential to be one of the places where the applications that depend on these super high-speed networks are developed, to take a leading role. Right now, there are a number of other cities, Kansas City obviously at the forefront, and a number of other cities sprinkled across the country where these networks are in place or are being deployed currently, but it's still relatively early stages. And so, you know, it's not just the healthcare, although that is a key sector that can be transformed here, but it's everything. I mean, the School of Music can benefit from this, all different phases of entertainment. Pretty much any sector can be transformed here. And to have the network in place and to be the community that is leading the way in developing those applications is very exciting and kind of feeds into attracting and retaining talent. Another key benefit is, you know, I loved those old AT&T commercials where they said, you know, it's not complicated, faster is better or something like that. even the applications we have today, it's a quality of life point. I mean, whether it is your email, you're watching Netflix, so there is telemedicine to some degree is possible today, but the faster the network is, the better your user experience on those applications will be. And the fourth, which I think Blair alluded to as his game of gigs, is it's not really a benefit of the network per se, as much as, hopefully the approach you take. The competitive benefits are very real. As Blair said, I kind of led the process down in North Carolina, and he mentioned Google. What he didn't mention about AT&T was we had sort of an unprecedented deal where AT&T actually agreed to expand outside of its traditional footprint and offer the community several benefits like free lower speed connections to public housing, connections to community centers, all sorts of things which you don't typically see a company like AT&T do, but they've been a good partner in that area. And the traditional incumbent that was in Durham, Frontier, made Durham the first city where it launched its gigabit network. And then the cable company also upgraded its speeds and lowered its prices. So the benefits of competition for residents in that community are very real. And to go back to the attracting and retaining talent point, I will say that when I went down to Durham, North Carolina from Washington, D.C., I didn't know how long I would stay. Durham is very different. But like Bloomington, Durham has its charms. And one of the main reasons that I thought about leaving initially was, well, we had these deals in place, the networks weren't there yet, and it was incredibly frustrating as someone who is used to having, reasonably decent speeds, certainly not the speeds we're talking about here, but speeds in DC are much better and the network's far more reliable than what I had in Durham, and that had a meaningful impact on my day-to-day life in a way that I didn't even realize until, you almost don't know what you have until it's gone, and when I was in Durham, that's what I experienced, and that was a big factor in my decision-making process. It wasn't ultimately why I left, because I would have waited for the networks like this, because they're exciting, but it's not a hypothetical when we say that residents, young people, look for networks like this in deciding where to live. It's a very real factor. And I could go on forever here, but I think in the interest of letting the panel go on, I'll stop there.
Well, I think that's also a good segue into Mike Trotsky.
Yeah, so many of you guys probably know that I spend a lot of time trying to think about what the future looks like. That's what I got to do for a living. This whole discussion reminds me and how important bandwidth is to the future of really kind of my origin story in technology. I got the chance to work on this project called KimViz at the University of Illinois at NCSA, and when I was in high school. And I went over, and at the same time, this is in 92, 93, Mark Anderson was there and Rob McCool. I got my first demo of the web there, and I was absolutely blown away. You could click on things, and yeah, it was postage-sized video, but video was playing, audio was playing. I could see how it would transform the world. And my teacher and I were so excited to get back to class and show our class how incredible this new technology was, and we dialed up on our 9600 baud slip connection and spent the entire hour, first of all, trying to figure out that there's 2 slashes in HTTP, but also calling and finding out and finally getting up, and literally the image wouldn't load, nothing worked, nothing happened, and I remember everyone in that class going, what a waste of the hour. But that moment for me kind of changed everything, and I feel like we're here again. Now, as I look to the future and things that are happening around augmented reality and 3D and the sort of, I think the real turning point for 3D is when we do things like what's happening with Lytro, where you can actually focus in and out on it. That's when the consumer adoption will come. The bandwidth around that is 50 times what a typical bandwidth is. Those things are coming, and what we're doing right now as a community is making a statement as to whether or not we're going to be in front of that curve or behind. And I think it's really easy for us as a community, because we love Bloomington so much, and I think this has been hit on several times. We love Bloomington so much, we often forget that yes, we are incredibly awesome, and sometimes that makes us slow down. I've talked about how we have great connectivity in Bloomington for the last 8 years. I say something about internet too. I've got like a standard line when I'm at a conference, right? But we're at a point now where there are communities clearly passing us with regard to this, and we must act, and we must produce something that's unique. And I think there's more than just an opportunity to lead on the side of actually providing fiber to the home. The business model and the way that we approach that is a unique opportunity to lead. I think there's some great opportunities there that I'm sure we'll explore later. One other point is just, I think we've also kind of all hit on perception is huge. As soon as this is over, I'm flying out to San Francisco, and every time I'm anywhere, I get the question, what's happening in Bloomington? What's happening in Indiana? I'm actually staying with a guy who was principal at Google Fiber, Neil Patel. He's on a board with me. I know what he's going to ask me, and I'm excited that I can talk about this event and that I can talk about that we're moving forward.
Rick, can I add a technical point? There was a question earlier on about obsolescence, is the way I took the question. Well, how do we know if we dug up the streets and we put in fiber that we wouldn't find out 5 years from now, oh my gosh, it shouldn't have been fiber. We should have put in PVC pipe, I mean, whatever. You make up something like that. Fiber has proven to be remarkably resilient as the carrier. And you change the optical equipment on it every so often, and magnificently, the capacity goes up by an order of magnitude, or 2 orders of magnitude, in how fast you can turn that flashlight on and off going through the fiber, and how many different ways you can break it up. So by real illustration of that, at Indiana University, if we take just the Bloomington and the Indianapolis campuses alone, we started on our network master plan rewiring the buildings that had old copper in them and everything else imaginable, some of these hundreds of years old, as you know, and the parts around the fiber plant that we need to do, 360 buildings in that plan in 2009. But what we're doing is we're refreshing stuff in the building, but by and large, the fiber that we already owned was in very good shape, and some of it was put in 20 years ago. And then fiber where we needed additional routes, we were putting it in, and we're upgrading the electronics on each end of it. So I just hope that gives the community some confidence, if we were to do this, that we can upgrade the optronics and equipment, but the core dig up the sidewalks issue, thus far experience shows it has very long resilience.
Thank you. Lynn, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to Bloomington's place in terms of competition between cities, not just making sure that we're the best that we can be here, but the importance in terms of site selection for businesses and that sort of thing.
Sure, thanks, Rick. We live in a highly competitive global environment that moves at incredible speeds. For example, the old style of economic development was what empty factory did you have and how quickly can you get some company to move in there. We'll get an inquiry now, they come through Indianapolis, and they'll want a 100,000 square foot building, 30-foot ceilings, railroad siding, and they want it in a month. Sorry, we don't have that. And frankly, a lot of communities do not have that anymore. What happens now is a decision is made to expand a manufacturing facility or to expand production, and they will walk out of the board meeting and they will order the equipment because there's a year lead time. And then they will look for a place to put it, and as that time shrinks, they're not building anything. They're looking for something already built for a place to put that. So our competitive advantage, the first thing to understand is who are we and what do we have to offer? Well, we are a highly educated community. We have a 91.1% educational attainment rate for people over 25. That means high school and above. Our bachelor's and masters are well over 20-some%. We have a community college. We have a very good secondary school system in MCCSC. And we have talent. We have quality of life. We have a place you can live, you can enjoy. We have breweries and coffee shops. You know, someone asked me the other day, a small community, what they needed to do to attract young people. I said, well, do you have a brewery? So the mayor is right. In his State of the City, he mentioned that. He was dead on. But at any rate, how we compete with other communities is based upon that. And then what we can do to offer them something. And understanding what we are. We are constrained by land use restrictions and decisions of local government that we probably will not have large manufacturing facilities. They will be in neighboring counties. But where do you think those people want to live? Crane is 20-some minutes away now on I-69. 6,000 people, 3,000 plus engineers. Where do you think they're living? Where do you think they're learning? Where do you think they're spending their money? Will start their own businesses. It's going to be here. And that's our competitive advantage, is who we are, what we are, our capacities, the services we can deliver. And that's why this broadband is so very important to staying current and being able to offer those things. People can live wherever they want to live, excuse me. If you go to Co-work B-Town and you look at the people sitting there, they're working in Los Angeles, they're working in New York, but they're sitting at a desk in Bloomington because it's Bloomington.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
point?
please.
For retention, particularly in staff jobs with the IT hat on, a lot of times, of course, the cost of living in Bloomington is a very favorable thing generally to West Coast jobs, et cetera, and we were able to use that on a retention basis. The chase for talent is such now that in some cases we're losing people from the university to go take some job somewhere, and they say, no, you don't even have to move, just telecommute. You know, you can just, work from home or wherever. And I say that both as a risk to us as a community, but also as a benefit. To the extent this town has greater and greater telecommunications infrastructure, people may choose to make their living here, even if they happen to dial in and do a little work for some company who knows where along the way. And in support of Lynn's 2 points, 2 of the 3 economic development projects I worked on not long ago, 2 of them we lost on to other states that had a building and facility already ready where somebody could move in, just to affirm your point.
Yeah. And
Startups too, I think about the classic version of a startup being, the Silicon Valley folks in a garage. But today, startups are started by people on couches in communities all over the place because of the connectivity that happens. And so that's why it's so critically important that connectivity doesn't just exist at an office, that connectivity is just as powerful in everybody's home.
And that person working in California gets their paycheck from California deposited in Bloomington, and this is where they spend the money.
We think about also connectivity as, short interactions on the web, or maybe, 4K streaming video from Netflix without it choking along the way. But in terms of startups and research, a lot of things are going on around big data. And let me give you a hint. Big data isn't small data. So you're often sometimes needing to move a few terabytes or 10 or 20 or 30 terabytes, which is a whole bunch, from one place to another. And if you're sipping through a straw, you just can't do it. So you may be using Amazon Web Services or Google or others, but co-locating data and processing remains a core issue for which the network is the key enabler.
Before our next question, just want to encourage you, if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get you a card.
Rick, did you have that slide? I had
Yeah.
Just one slide to put up there, if that happens to be handy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. My chief of staff grabbed this. All data on the web are dated by at least a second or a year or two. This is from 2014 National Broadband data. Urbana-Champaign being the place on the left and one of our notorious rivals to recruit to and from for talent. But you notice the broadband coverage at around there, all solid. You see the representation here in Bloomington showing we have some work to do. And sadly, I'm on the wrong side of the tracks personally for where that connects.
And when we're going to these community, we're talking to people about coming, guess what Champaign-Urbana is going to show them? This slide. That's how it works, and that's what we're fighting against. So we need to make it blue. Thank you for that slide.
Elise, can you speak to your experience in the research triangle? You worked with a number of different cities, and one of the things that has become obvious to me as I've looked into this topic for a long time is, no two cities are exactly the same, and no solution is exactly the same. What have you learned from your very broad experience in GigU and in the research triangle?
Sure. So I think Blair alluded to it with GigU, and as you said, I mean, you can't have a cookie cutter experience. There's differences in state and local laws. There's differences in the level of community support. There's differences in the local market and demography, geography. All of these factors come into play in figuring out the right solution for a particular community. And I think a big part of that, as Blair alluded to, the foundation is the vision. And having the right vision is the key factor that I've seen in all of the communities that succeed. They may actually end up taking a different approach to get there, but it starts with the vision and the commitment to that vision and the drive to see it through. And then from there, you do have to tweak it based on the trade-offs between your different goals and the realities of what you're seeing in the market and the legislative and political environment. But commitment to seeing it through, I think, works for a lot of the communities that I've seen.
And then, some of the benefits that those, I think it's early days for some of those communities, but what's starting to happen there that looks positive?
It is early days. I think you'll probably hear Aaron talk about some of the benefits that Kansas City's seen, and Lev and Cleveland. These are communities that have had it among the longest, for the longest in the country. So they can talk a little bit more. But as I said, from day one, when it started to become obvious that AT&T and/or Google were going to do something in the Triangle area, you started to see the local cable company and the other local telephone company really step up in a meaningful way. As an example, I lived in an apartment complex where we had free cable but had to pay for the internet. And when it became obvious that AT&T and Google were coming in, the provider upgraded it so not only did everyone have free internet of some kind, but free 20 megabit per second internet now. It's a far cry from a gig, but at the same time, it's free and it's a nice benefit. They also stepped up by increasing, I think their top speed in the area was 50 megabits per second, maybe 75. They, within a few months, upped that to 300 megabits per second. And so those benefits come far before any of the benefits on the application side, but they're necessary because you can start to do more even at 300 megabits per second. And the other thing I want to touch on is I think there's a question about the speed. 5 years it took for Google to deploy in Kansas City. These things do take a long time, and I don't want to suggest they don't, but they don't all have to take as long. I think Google itself is learning as it goes, and it's starting to be able to get to market in a much quicker ways. Any of the incumbents who already have network infrastructure can get to the market more quickly. And then depending on what assets the city has, they can use. There may be ways to speed it up. So I don't want to suggest it can happen tomorrow, but it can happen more quickly than it may have happened elsewhere.
Mike, could you follow on that point a little bit about, what would you see as the impact on your, operations for SproutBox and a number of your, companies and the broader startup tech scene here in Bloomington?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I kind of alluded to the idea of startups on a couch or in a dorm room, but that is where everything that SproutBox is involved in started, and we're really just deciding what we're going to limit in terms of what people can do. are we going to be focused in on which side of new technology will we be focused in on based on the limitations that you're putting right into your house as to whether or not you can do something. Let's say you want to work on a new 3D-oriented augmented reality piece of technology that require, even to check it out, to start to play with the players that exist right now in that space. Bandwidth is not adequate in most places to even try it. So you save up your capital, you go out and you get a piece of equipment to try something like that out, and you suddenly find out, like that 9600 baud slip connection, that you're not going to be able to do that in this community, which means we won't have those types of startups available for us at SproutBox to look at getting involved with. You're basically setting a ceiling for the community every time you don't make these advancements. And to the point about 5 years, I mean, I think if it's going to take 5 years, then we should have started 5 years ago. I don't feel like that. You got to understand that this isn't going to stop. Bandwidth consumption grows by 20-40% every year. I'm not an expert in that, but it's obviously not, there's no end in sight to that. So this is not a, hey, let's all get together and solve this problem once and go home. We should be talking about this, every year for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, let me add to that. The incoming wave of freshmen at Indiana University can pretty much suck the lifeblood out of any network that you can provide. They bring, I think, on an average about 5 devices or 6 apiece that they register. And they're doing lots of things. Of course, some of it is entertainment and gaming related. Quite a bit of it is exploring, self-directed learning, trying things. And to this very point, while we can make the network capacity go up, and up by increasing the gear, the technical gear on it, the applications that we wish to do continue to go up. Streaming a somewhat okay, slightly jittery movie from Netflix on demand was really of great interest relative to waiting for the little red mailer at one time. 4K video will be about as exciting as, something from the late 90s pretty soon. And it is a bandwidth hog in what it needs to be able to stream through. If you've seen the investments in the Cuban Center and other things going on in the stadium and at Assembly Hall, this notion of 3D and being able to have all sorts of replay in 3-dimension, we're not that far out where that'll just be common and expected. So our appetite for the consumption of bandwidth will continue to grow even as the technology enablement chases it. And what we're really missing right now is filling that hole.
Rick, can I also just add 2 other things in terms of what I've seen, one of which is critically important to a university town, is that a number of communities that already have these networks in place or are on the way to getting them recently have received, they're part of a consortium that received a lot of federal money to help develop these applications. And so that's another important part of what, important benefit for the communities that are out there on the leading edge. And the other thing in terms of what I'm starting to see, which isn't, it's both a result of the networks coming and an important part in their success, is that you start to see community engagement and momentum that are going to be an important part of driving the conversations around startups, anything around digital literacy and adoption. The community itself plays a key role, and those communities that themselves are active, I think, will get the most out of the networks, not just get the networks there.
Real quick, when one of the challenges I think we have 28 companies that were invested in the SproutBox portfolio. About 15 of them are from, the coasts or out of state. And so when we're trying to attract startups to come in, and this dovetails back to perception, we're in Indiana, this is a fact, and I have to convince everyone to come stay here for 3 months. And these sorts of things, just like this, being at the forefront of that and saying, hey, did you see the business model that we put together and put forward as a small community, are exactly the sort of things that will convince somebody like that to show up. So that's a very direct impact on what I do.
If I remember the numbers correctly, and I think rounding down, you guys see these announcements coming out of the university all the time, a $2 million grant for this and a $5 million grant for that in medical and sciences and all. The multiplier numbers, as I recall, a $1 million grant to a university, by the time it is spent and bounces around in the community, someone works here, they go grocery shopping, et cetera, every $1 million creates greater than 10 person years of employment. One person for 10 years, 10 people for 1 year. And so our ability to pull in those contracts and grants have very, very large economic multipliers in the local economy. Two other things that we stood up recently, one called Jetstream, and you hear a lot about Big Red 2 in the data center and such. But we are truly at a point right now where a researcher who may be a plant scientist or a psychology researcher, she may be sitting at home with her iPad directly manipulating one of our supercomputers and the tools to enable research on, again, very, very large big data sets coming from across the nation. This is really, really important, kind of, if I, in the harshest of sense here, but supercomputing for dummies, you know, so that it really runs on your iPad and you can manipulate all this stuff. This is a multiplier to our faculty pulling in more grants that drive the economic multiplier of jobs up and down the street in Bloomington.
I want to give just a few more minutes and we'll take an audience question. We just had such a good discussion, I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but question is about how can we as a community provide high-speed bandwidth when there's areas of the community that current providers aren't willing to do that. That touches on the a digital divide question, but we've already touched on a number of digital divides. One is between the campus and off campus, where there's a high-speed network on campus and off campus isn't as high speed. Then there's obviously economic dimensions to this as well. So as part of this process, how can we ensure that nobody's left behind?
First of all, it's hard to do. I don't want to suggest that, but the way you do it is to require it. And even if I'm not saying require it of the incumbents or whatever, but the more it is a priority for you and it influences all of your decisions throughout this process, the more likely it is that you will have success. And that may mean, as Blair alluded to, that if you want everyone served, then you may have to take on more risk capital. I mean, the trade-offs will vary depending on your approach to the business model. As I said, in North Carolina, the digital inclusion was incredibly important to the communities, and that entered into the negotiations and was consistent from all of the mayors in the 6 communities that we worked with. And as a result, AT&T provided free connections to community centers and hooked up low-income housing, and Google will be hooking up public housing. So I can't say there is one way to do it, just like there's not one business model, and it's certainly not easy, particularly if you go out there with the idea that that's going to occur on day one. As you've said, there's a lot of really good, financially solid businesses in place today that haven't been able to do it. But they also, and I'm not criticizing this, but they have to serve their shareholders. Their job is not actually to serve all of the needs of the community. Their role is to serve their shareholders. And so they have to make those trade-offs. The community's role is to serve the community, and so you'll have a different set of trade-offs, whether you choose to work through existing incumbents or take control of the network yourself.
Rick, I would just add, we've solved this problem once before when telephones became available. I grew up in a very small town in Oklahoma, 1,200 people. We had a small telephone company there. It was required by law to extend phone lines out into the rural agricultural areas. You do this by public policy. That's really practically the only way I know of that you accomplish this. But the incentive for doing so is Bob Metcalf, one of the co-founders of 3Com, says the value of a network is approximately equal to the number of users connected squared. And so if you remember your math, it goes like that. So the more people we connect to the network, the more valuable it becomes over time. We have to distribute the costs of running that network in a way that's economically viable, as Blair rightly said. But the value and the utility of it to a community, imagine if we had a phone system that had been built over the prior 100 years, but it only connected Los Angeles and New York and Chicago. It would have been far less valuable to us as a nation. So we've done this once through public policy. Seems to be probably the tool that has to be involved again.
I feel like I'm, you know, on the digital divide issue. I live in Blue Ridge, and we have recently received Smithville Gigabit symmetrical fiber, which is awesome. And so, you know, I tell that to everyone, and everyone's jealous of me, right? There's a divide right now. But I think about how we got that in Blue Ridge. It was about our community. Our neighborhood association was approached by Smithville, and we went around and collected everybody up to get, you know, the 59 people that we needed in order to consolidate enough demand to make that happen. And I think, you know, as we think about what we're doing in the neighborhood, we've got to think about how the community collects itself to make something happen in the entire city.
I agree with both Brad and Mike, and I think what's important here is, you know, we're sitting here, the lights are on. How do you think the electricity got here? You know, they didn't go around it. We found out how to get electricity to everybody. I think we need to do that with broadband. I mean, we can't leave part of our community behind, because such an important function of broadband is education, and how that integrates into the school system. Well, just secondary school system, if none other, but certainly at higher ed and in the community college. And they have to have access, as Mr. Levin said, you know, children using Khan Academy. Everybody should be able to do that. And we can have children in some part of the community accessing that and learning, and some not.
I think that was a piece in the New York Times this morning or yesterday, as I recall, students standing on the sidewalk outside of their school so they could leech off the Wi-Fi after hours because they didn't have that connectivity at home to be able to do their assignments and homeworks. That's not who we want to be.
No, and it's going to be increasingly demanded of them. And so one solution, of course, you have the policy solution, you have a construction solution. You know, find someone who needs it that can afford it at the other end of the pipe, and run it down the street where people can't afford it, and figure out how to make it happen. So there's a lot of issues involved, a lot of planning involved. But I think we're the kind of community, as I said earlier, we have the assets, the will, and the ability to make it happen for everyone, and we just have to keep that in mind.
On that note, I'll bring this panel to a close. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.